Staying with the financials, the sector reassured by President-elect Trump's eco picks, including Scott Bessent for Treasury Secretary and Kevin Hassett for NEC. Tim Adams of the Institute of International Finance saying this: we'll likely see burgeoning M&A activity with an improved deal-making landscape. Personnel is policy. Annmarie says that all the time. So we'll see who comes in at the regulatory agencies to learn more about the future of regulations. Tim joins us now. Tim, thank you so much for being here.
Great being here.
So do you see right now the banking sector is really driving a lot of the optimism in the financial space going forward?
Sure, and they're hearing it from their clients. Animal spirits are back in the U.S. The outlook is, for the near term at least, is pretty bright. There's a sense of deregulation across Europe and the U.S. We'll see how much of that actually happens. But, there's a sense of optimism that we haven't seen in a while.
Does that optimism, is it mostly centered, or should it be mostly centered on the largest American banks or the smaller ones?
Oh, I think it's across the board. I think Main Street and Wall Street are going to do well over the near term. But Wall Street looks at the near term with great optimism. I think deal flow is going to pick up. We're going to see IPOs. We're going to see M&A activity, and that's good for our institutions.
I know you're concerned, though, about the deficit. So you took kindly to the fact that there's some deficit hawks when it comes to personnel as policy. But over the weekend, Trump said that he's not going to cut Social Security, entitlements, not going to raise the retirement age. How are you supposed to get the deficit down?
Yeah, it's very hard because most of what you just described, if you look at social insurance and defense and net interest on the debt is about 90% of what we spend. The rest is kind of a rounding error. We can grow, and I think Scott Bessent, who's going to be the next Treasury Secretary, is focused on growth. That's good, but we're going to have to find ways to find savings. Deficit hawks are gone in Washington. They don't exist anymore. And maybe you need the markets to send us a signal. It's time to become more sober in our fiscal outlook.
Tim, you've spent a lot of time focused on the structure of the financial system in the United States, and by all accounts, it's really strong and it's diversified. There's been a lot of discussion around mergers among smaller banks and how much we could see if there is an administration that is amenable to that kind of tie-up. How much could we see?
I think you'll see a lot. I think you end up seeing a barbelling. The largest institutions get larger and the mid-sized become larger. It's a scale business. Look at JP Morgan spends $17 billion a year on technology. Jamie probably would spend trillion if he could. But think about the tech spend that these institutions put in place and who they're competing with. And then you'll see smaller local institutions that know the local market. So it's a bifurcation. The mid-sized guys are going to get bigger.
Well, you raised this question. Who are the big competitors? Is it Apple? Is it
absolutely.
Google? Or is this an issue of, say, the Apollos of the world? And this has been sort of the two-sided barbell at a time where potentially fewer regulations for the largest banks could make them more competitive against both.
Yeah, I'd probably meet 200 CEOs a year in the financial sector. We hear a lot about private credit and private equity. We hear a lot about Apple, Google, and the tech platforms. And if you're Jamie, you're trying to compete with the tech platforms, right? And then maybe you can acquire or partner with private equity and private credit.
I'm really curious what happens to Europe in all of this.
Yeah.
If you have this growing American banking system, if the biggest get bigger, and they're not just eating the smaller banks' lunch, they're taking it from Europe too, which has been really struggling and has tried Unicredit, Commerce, trying to get some sort of merger through. Does something need to change? Will it finally start to happen?
Absolutely. Core Europe is on its back politically and economically. German economy is really struggling. The periphery is doing much better. Spain, Greece, Poland. But Europe needs banking consolidation. They need capital markets union, banking union. There's so much that this new commission and this new parliament needs to take on. They're saying the right things, but we'll see. It's time for action across Europe.
We saw Unicredit try to do that with Commerzbank, and the Germans really did not want that to happen.
Yeah.
What could give the boost to these countries to say, okay, we should start consolidating?
Well, you're hearing it from Christine Lagarde out of the ECB. She's signaling you need consolidation. You need Brussels to say it's time to act, it's time to consolidate. I think this deal is going to go through over time, and I think we'll see more over time as well.
Hold on a second. You think that the Germans are going to be okay with an Italian bank taking over one of their national champions? Let's underscore that.
They already have. The Italians have already taken over. They have no choice, right? These are great institutions. I like Commerzbank. The CEO, Bettina, is wonderful. I think they all realize that to compete domestically and internationally and compete with U.S. firms on the continent, they've got to consolidate.
Tim, you talk with a lot of regulators. You talk with a lot of elected politicians. And I'm curious about whether you've really heard a change in tone over in Europe that recognizes how different this moment is that they're in.
I think the Trump shock has gotten their attention. I think they know they have to do more. But Brussels is a challenging place. It's a bureaucratic machine. So you need political leadership right now that's missing in France and Germany. Hopefully in 6 months we'll have greater stability. Brussels needs to act. Frankfurt needs to act. We need to see political leadership.
Where is the political leadership right now in Europe?
Missing.
At the G7, it felt like it was Giorgia Meloni that was almost this central figure of Europe, because everyone that showed up was either a lame duck or on their way out.
Well, the Poles have the rotating presidency, the EU. They're very pro-growth, and I like what they've done with their economy. I like where they want to go. Spain is saying, look at us, we're growing fast. And Greece, which was always sort of the stepchild of the EU for so many years, is now really putting in great performance. I think what you'll see over time, core Europe figuring out they need to lead and do more. And Germany is the secret and the key to the future of European growth.
So you've done on this whirlwind tour of the whole world. You're coming to an end. I'm sure you're very happy to be going home.
Yeah.
What's your big takeaway, Tim, after meeting with international leaders of finance around the world?
There's enormous optimism about the U.S., but there's concerns. There's just so much we don't know about what this new administration is going to do. The economic leaders that have been put in place, personnel as policy, have really buoyed that outlook. But ultimately, how will these different policies be put in place? Will we see tariffs? Is it selective, incremental, or is it much broader? We just don't know.
Tim Adams of the IIF, thank you so much for being with us.